Good evening from New York. The media overreaction to the H1N1 virus, swine flu, sufficient enough tonight for a network television medical expert to say on air that the media was overreacting, and so would be any American school that closed its doors without clear evidence that one of its students had been affected. On the other hand, this morning, the Vice President of the United States said, "I wouldn't go anywhere in confined places right now." Our fifth story on the countdown, politicians panic or the swine flu, which is the most hazardous to your health? Vice President Biden on the Today Show, first defending the Obama administration's decision not to close this country's border with Mexico. Then this.
Let me ask this, and this is by no means a gotcha type of question, I promise, but if a member of your family came to you, no, Mr. Vice President, if a member of your family came to you and said, look, I want to go on a commercial airliner to Mexico and back within the next week, would you think it's a good idea?
I would tell members of my family, and I wouldn't go anywhere in confined places now. It's not that it's going to Mexico, it's you're in a confined aircraft. When one person sneezes, it goes all the way through the aircraft. That's me. I would not be at this point, if they had another way of transportation, suggesting they ride the subway. So from my perspective, what it relates to is mitigation. If you're out in the middle of a field and someone sneezes, that's one thing. If you're in a closed aircraft, a closed container, a closed car, a closed classroom, it's a different thing.
He did not add, hold your breath till next Tuesday. Within 2 hours, the White House released this statement from the Vice President's spokesperson, which reads in part, the advice the Vice President, is giving family members is the same advice the administration is giving to all Americans, that they should avoid unnecessary air travel to and from Mexico. If they are sick, they should avoid airplanes and other confined public spaces such as subways. This is the advice the Vice President has given family members who are traveling by commercial airline this week. The Secretary of Homeland Security offering the same interpretation of Mr. Biden's intent, quoting, I think the Vice President, if he could say that over again, he would say if they're feeling sick, they should stay off of public transit or confined spaces, because that is indeed the advice that we're giving. Criticism of Mr. Biden's remarks by the travel industry, unsurprisingly swift, from an American Airlines spokesman by way of example, to suggest that people not fly at this stage of things is a broad brush stroke bordering on fear-mongering. Let the demongering begin.
If you feel sick, if you are exhibiting symptoms, flu-like symptoms, coughing, sneezing, runny nose, that you should take precautions, that you should limit your travel. And I think he just, what he said and what he meant to say. Jake, I understand what he said, and I'm telling you what he meant to say, which was that...
And at the Department of Homeland Security news conference this afternoon, the question raised again, are all modes of transportation safe? The answer was yes. Let's call in our own Howard Fineman, also senior Washington correspondent, political columnist for Newsweek magazine, and not wearing a mask. Good evening, Howard.
I was tempted, though.
In the context of commentators asking if this was actually a bioterror attack, and the Associated Press reporter kicking off that news conference last night asking if we maybe should close the border with Mexico if the president considered it, what the vice president said wasn't that much of a gaffe. On the other hand, it was the vice president. What's the reaction been in Washington?
Well, part of the reaction is eye-rolling, and there goes Joe Biden again, and we know Joe, and that's what he does. He's not a loose cannon. Sometimes he's a whole flotilla. But this was serious because it had potential economic effects, and it sort of amped up, as you said, the sort of semi-paranoia that's already abroad in the land. And there was a lot of backing and filling first by the Vice President's office. That wasn't adequate. That was a modified limited hangout, as they used to say in the old Nixon days, and it required basically the HHS, the CDC, the DOT, and Robert Gibbs to set the story straight. So it was taken seriously. It wasn't a funny matter.
One death in this country, and tragic as it was, technically it was not that of an American citizen. But in a paranoid time, is there a limit to the success of efforts to correct what the Vice President said?
Well, they certainly, in the administration, tried hard to correct it, and swiftly. The first statement wasn't adequate to the task, but they did have Ray LaHood of DOT. They did have Janet Napolitano of the Department of Homeland Security. They had Robert Gibbs out there being laughed at in the press room, even as he tried to correct the record. Gibbs said to me later, he said, look, this was a teachable moment. But it's not the kind of teachable moment that the administration wished it had to take time for today. They got other stuff stuff going on.
The president was the first public official to go out there and say, as he did last night, don't get on public transportation if you have these certain flu-like symptoms. Now the vice president taking it further, presumably further than he intended to or was supposed to intend to. What of this sense of possible political overreaction for the most noble of reasons, and you'd rather have that than the other kind of reaction, but if it's piled on top of media overreaction, I mean, Fox used the graphic last night that read, "New Black Death?" ? Things gotten out of hand in the media and in the press conferences more than they have in terms of medically?
Well, I think it seems like at times a closed loop between the political establishment and the media to the detriment perhaps of the American people who are all keeping their kids home from school. I don't know that it's necessarily wise for the president to have gone out there and sort of act like he was in an episode of Grey's Anatomy. And Joe Biden took it a step beyond that this morning and didn't have the ability to be exact in his language about it. I think the other problem here, Keith, is that the administration has been focused on economics, rightly so. There's a hang-up in a lot of the confirmation and appointment of administration staff, including a lot of people in the healthcare end of things. HHS secretary only confirmed yesterday. No Surgeon General, no head of the FDA, who, by the way, Dr. Margaret Hamburg, who had been New York City Health Commissioner, would be the superb person to be out there talking about this. I don't know that the president and the vice president should have gotten involved at this level, because that in and of itself amps up the sense of crisis.
Yeah, the president last night tried to medicate the country and also fix our car engines for us. It was kind of a busy night for him. Howard Fineman of Newsweek and MSNBC. Thank you as always, Howard.